Before Shopify, were you wondering, where are my sales at? Now you're selling with Shopify, the global commerce platform supercharging your selling. You have no problem selling online, in person, on social media, and beyond. Gary, easy on the cha-ching.
Oh, sorry, but my Shopify sales are through the roof.
Start selling with Shopify today and discover how millions of businesses around the world use Shopify to ignite their selling. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.
So our podcast is called Right and Wrong.
Are these your notes?
These
Are your notes about what we're going to say?
That's a really good question.
Sculptor doesn't put their slab of clay or whatever on their plinth and then start doing the eyelashes.
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Just like gushing over your back.
What's first for everything? This is it, guys. The big secret to getting published is you have to write a good book. You heard it here first. Hello, and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. I'm Jamie, and joining me today is Wolf Literary's international super agent, Kate Johnson. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm fascinated by the nature of your work because you are based in Bristol. Is that right?
That's right.
But you represent authors in both the US and the UK. How does that work?
It happened, I'll start with that because I had been working in New York for about 9 years for another agency, and my husband, who's British, had moved there for me. And around 4 years into his living there, he needed a shake up and I needed a shake up. And I already knew some of the ladies working at Wolf Literary who were happy to have me work abroad, and really wanted someone to expand their literary fiction list. And so I actually started with a few months up in Glasgow where my husband was going to grad school.
Okay.
And we've moved to Bristol so that I could commute to London if I needed to, and he can get to Newport where he is still working for the Office for National Statistics. So it's a compromised city, but I've really grown to love it here. And the UK part of my job has really expanded and kind of been able to become my own since I've been here. So I do have a mix of clients now who are both American and British. And I also now handle UK rights for the agency and for an agent, Gillian McKenzie, as well.
Oh, okay. So when you came over, all of your clients were US based, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
I see. And has it sort of changed to be more UK heavy now in terms of your list?
It is getting there. I still find, obviously I have, all of my previous clients from the US, and I find that some of my sensibilities still seem to align there, or I tend to still be reading sort of US story magazines or publications where I just tend to, get American media. And so that's still a healthy kind of part of my literary diet. But certainly I'm very keen to find more British writers. My first client was a Glaswegian named Beatrice Collin, who has sadly passed away. Oh. But that was, I actually took an offer from Flatiron Books from Amy Einhorn, outside of a chip shop around 9 p.m. in Glasgow. And that was kind of the start of being able to make that transition.
Amazing. Is it, you obviously sort of keep an ear out for both US and UK markets. Is it very different in terms of the way that you approach the writing and what you're proposing to publishers?
The writing, I think the style is so personal to each writer, no matter where they're from. And I have some writers who I think see themselves as more British, and I don't know or British versus American, and I don't know if I always agree with their take.
Okay.
But if they're based in Britain, it tends to make sense for me to approach a British publisher first. Mm-hmm. And likewise for the US. But there are some cases where it's a more international story or nonfiction where we might try something simultaneously.
Right. Yeah. I have a few of my friends are YA authors, and I often hear around the industry that the YA market is much larger in the US. Have you found that as well?
Completely. I do some YA submissions over here in the UK for colleagues, and it is such a tight market over here. And one thing that's changing here. I think expanding, but slowly, is the market for graphic novels, which I love and which my colleagues do a bit of. And it's just a smaller market. And because it's smaller, I do think even just stuff like production costs that go into something illustrated and colorful like that really limit what they can do over here.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'd not considered that graphic novels was a much larger outside of the UK.
Yeah.
But a lot of writers that I speak to are reluctant to submit their work to agents overseas. Do you think that, I mean, having done it a long time before a lot of other people, because a lot of people have been forced to work more remotely in the pandemic and the lockdowns and things. What are the sort of different challenges that come from working internationally versus locally between an agent and a writer?
The biggest challenge is certainly one that has been bridged a little bit with the pandemic and being able to hop on Zoom anytime. But it's, wonderful to meet my clients in person and be able to have that really, face-to-face chat, which I do think is different from a 40-minute Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
And I really have always been a night owl, and so this time zone has suited me as far as working late and being able to overlap and be available for my clients who are 5 hours behind or 8 hours behind if they're on the West Coast. But that's something that I would, if I were an author and starting out and working with an international agent, I would want to be aware of and ask that question about availability.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But other than that, other than time zone difference, which is always, going to be a complication in things.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any other kind of barriers or bridges, or do you think that aspiring writers, people looking for agents, should look beyond their own borders?
I think it really depends on their books. It often does make sense, I would say, to have a local agent, and so for I guess I feel local to New York, which is why I feel like I can say that for my own New York or American-based clients, because I have the base there and they can process, even just from a practical standpoint, the agency can process American checks and do things that I wouldn't do from the UK. So I do think that's important. It's really important to have your agent have a knowledge of whatever market they're working in. So if you think your book is going to sell in America, you want an agent who has had experience, living and meeting editors in America and keeping up with that. And proximity is just easier with that. And likewise, for British clients, I'm happy to be there. But I do think the US office gives them extended reach with the US publishers that I can do directly for them.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's about where I expected. So it's like you can do it, but you should probably have a look locally first, and then consider in more international business relationships. Is that sort of what you're?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking of different exceptions. She's not a client, she's a good friend named Gillian Best, who's a Canadian writer but lives in the UK. And in her agent search, I think she ended up with a North American agency. But I think for her case, because though she's Canadian, she lives in Britain and has been published in Britain, I thought that she could actually probably look either way. And so those cases where maybe you're living abroad or you're living in Europe but writing in English, where you probably have a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah. Well, if there's anything I've learned about publishing in the industry, it's that everyone has a very unique journey, and things fall into place in completely different ways for every
Absolutely. This is not a one size fits all path. I don't think for anyone.
Exactly. Yeah. And dialing back a bit, am I right in thinking before you were a literary agent, did you start out in journalism?
I did. Yeah. I thought I was going to be a magazine editor. And so I went to school for journalism at Northwestern and near Chicago. And I realized they had a really great internship program and set me up with different magazines. And one of them was Book Magazine, which at the time was a sort of magazine for readers based in New York and funded by Barnes and Noble. And I just found that I was much more interested in the book news and the books that came in the mail and the smell of them and the author news. And I then sort of the production of the magazine, though that was fun too. And I've worked doing fact checking for New York Magazine, and it was just, fun and fast paced. But I don't think I've got the personality for like hard hitting reporting. And and I just, I really gravitated toward the book world for sure. And that was I think the experience that clarified that for me.
Yeah, right. But you, I was having a look at your bio on the Wolf website, and you do like to work with journalists.
Yes,
on your books.
I do. I love kind of they know how to shape a story, especially again, like longer form magazine journalism or long form at a newspaper. I think they really can see how to shape it, and and on a practical level, they work to deadline and really take editing really well.
Yeah.
But I find that's one place for my nonfiction I look at a lot is just newspapers and magazines and see the pieces that have kind of influenced and caught the eye of a certain writer.
And do you sort of do equal measure fiction and nonfiction, or do you lean one way?
It's both. I would say I feel like fiction is where my heart has been for a long time, but now I really divide equally,
Okay.
More or less depending on what's capturing my attention and what my clients are up to.
Right. With you say you work with a lot of journalists. With that nonfiction side of things, do you approach people and ask and perhaps pitch ideas to specific journalists and things like that, or is it more you see what a journalist is working on and then reach out to them and say, "Would you be interested in writing a book on this thing?"
Both.
It's okay.
Yeah, I would say both. I sometimes end up kind of going down wormholes that don't, come to fruition. I remember when I lived in Brooklyn, there was a big debate at the Park Slope Food Co-op about boycotting products from Israel, and it was so focused on local food, but it was sort of hummus and the Soda Stream, and became a real issue. And a journalist was writing about sort of the politics of hummus, and I thought that could be a wonderful book, but it never quite.
I'd write for the title, "The Politics of Hummus."
It just never quite got to where it should have been, and I'm sure it was frustrating for her and for me, and that kind of thing can happen. But then, on the flip side, I've had some real wonderful luck working with journalists and letting that, like, even if it's not quite the book I had in mind, it will end up being something really smart. So it's been really fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a sort of network of journalists that you reach out to, or are you always kind of looking to work with new ones?
Oh, always looking for new ones.
Okay.
It's funny, my fiction clients tend to be more interconnected or recommend their friends a bit more. And I don't know if that's just because of MFA programs or those circles. Or maybe that's just like, I don't know if this is true, less competitive. That's probably not true. What am I saying? But I don't know. For whatever reason, the fiction clients tend to come from referrals. And I feel like most of nonfiction, when it's journalism, is me reaching out individually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are you not currently open to submissions?
I am open to submissions now.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do read those queries, and I have found some brilliant things in my queries. Yeah.
Okay, so talking about, and this is something I ask all the agents that come on the show, when you open up a submission, and the submission package for Wolf it's just a query letter and then 50-page writing sample for fiction,
yeah.
And then for nonfiction, it's just the query letter and the detailed proposal, which is pretty standard. But I'm interested that you don't ask for a synopsis, which a lot of agencies do. How come that's not a priority at Wolf?
So for now, And speaking for Wolf more generally,
Yeah.
I think it's just for right now, the mix of agents we have and the kind of books we do. And I'll briefly mention my colleagues. So Lee Eisenman, who does nonfiction. And so most of that is just proposal based.
Sure.
And then my colleague Rach, who also does a mix. But I would say she and I, Rach Crawford, our tastes are similar in that it's so much about voice and the kinds of books I think I can speak for that, like, can't really be spoiled, if you know what I mean, by knowing the plot, because it's about the telling of the story and not just action or adventure necessarily, or even just we want a story. And I don't mean to say that's not important, but to me the synopsis and in some writer's hand is going to be so different. So I'd rather skip ahead and just be reading the actual work and not a long form synopsis.
And if you read a submission and it really grabs you, when you ask for the full manuscripts, do you also ask for a synopsis, or do you just go straight into the manuscript?
I just go straight in and just keep reading.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the query letter does tend to have not a full synopsis at all, but just a couple sentences or maybe a paragraph describing it, but kind of just that back of the book type copy.
Yeah.
And that's enough for me.
So what makes a great query letter for you?
So an ideal query letter would be something that I think is personalized and that shows that an author has done their research, that they, it seems like it might be quicker just to send a big Dear Agent to anyone. But to me, if I see that they've kind of done their research and to know what I'm representing, it just indicates a wider engagement with the literary world and that they're reading current material. And likewise for that, it's helpful for me and for them to say somewhere that sort of their book would appeal to readers of so-and-so or was inspired by so-and-so. I think authors feel sometimes younger, newer authors don't want to say like something that might imply like I'm the next Jonathan Franzen,
Sure.
which I also like wouldn't want to hear or read. But I think if they, you can say I've been inspired by Rachel Cusk or someone. You can name your influences and your hoped for readership, and that helps me kind of understand how you'd like me to read the query.
Yeah, I've seen people phrasing it in different ways where they say sort of this would sit on the shelf alongside X,
Yeah,
Y,
I
Z.
like that one too.
Do you like it when people do sort of pop culture references? So it's like if this movie met this book or this television show.
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, any comps, something that's relevant and helpful and hip, but most of all accurate is important.
Yeah, okay.
But also I will say any of that the author can give us really helps us then put together a package for submitting to an editor if we decide to take the project on.
Right.
Those editors really use comp titles. And for their purposes, books are still more helpful because they want to look at sales figures. But
Sure.
I still think a pop cultural movie reference, it indicates wide readership and it's fun and it's catching. So
yeah, I guess it grabs your attention. So what you sort of want on a query letter, and I think this is echoing what other agents have said on the podcast as well, is that you want the writer to sort of give at least the beginnings of what the marketing pitch will be to the editor, or like have some idea of where the brand is.
Yeah, it helps to have as many of those tools kind of in the arsenal as possible. And it's a balance because it's not the author's job per se to market themselves, and that is where the agent needs to step in and shape that. Yeah. But it helps me to understand the book and help me to understand how they see the book, and that's just an important start to our relationship.
I guess it also puts you in a good mindset because you're going to read that before you read the writing sample. So you're going to know what to expect at that point. So you're going to be more sort of open to it.
Yeah. If someone said they were trying to kind of, or inspired by Cormac McCarthy, I think it would, and then I get these short staccato sentences. I think that would also kind of give me this is what you're going for, and sort of put me in the right mood for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. And so what are your pet peeves when you get a submission?
My pet peeves are kind of that dear agent thing.
Yeah.
I, um, you get some where I feel for them because they're already defensive. You can just tell they've met with a lot of rejection, but it kind of comes across as rudeness to me, someone who they haven't met and who has not rejected them, and
Yeah.
that's just, I really do feel for writers because it's a tough industry and no one actually wants to be sending out rejections to writers, but I know how they feel, and so any of those that are just kind of start immediately defensive or like, you don't know how brilliant I am and you'll probably turn this down, like isn't a good start. And you'd be surprised by how many of those show up in
Wow.
agents'
Okay.
inboxes. And then I just ask for patience. And I think that's another thing that's not transparent to aspiring authors is how much we have to read and the order in which we need to read it. As much as their novel might sound amazing and I'll intend to read it right away, if my clients then deliver the 2 novels I've been waiting months for, or there's a nonfiction book I have to just get out the door because it's timely and connected to a newsy hook, those things just end up taking time. And then I also have a personal life.
Yes,
so
exactly.
And
what you also have, I mean, it's very easy for people submitting to forget that agents, like the primary job of the agent is to represent the clients they already have, and that's a lot of paperwork and admin and meetings with publishers and editors and all this, that, the other. And then on top of that, you have the pile of reading that you have to do, which I mean, I don't know what the numbers are like, but I would imagine, 1 in 50 probably submissions you read, you will request or
that figures is about right, actually. Yeah.
So how many submissions do you get sort of on average per week?
Per week? I would say 14, averaging like a couple a day.
Okay, that's not too bad then. That's not too bad.
It's not too bad. Yeah, it's not. I've just done a big clear out of like hundreds that have just piled up from the last year, which I guess were more than what's half of 365 for 120. I'm not going to do the math on air, but
a big number.
Big number.
A lot of reading, a lot of pages, and it's 50 pages, which is, well, I guess it depends on the font size, but it's not a short amount of reading for each one.
No, it's not. And I do really like to meaningfully consider the work I get. And there's some where it's just an uneasy pass. It's because I might do a YA for a client or a children's book for a client. Sorry, for a colleague and do their UK rights. I don't myself handle that market. And so it might be a pass if someone just misfires something that I don't represent, or sometimes, immediately like this isn't for me. But there's a lot of middle type submissions where you do read the full 50 pages and maybe ask for more because it's good and you're on the fence perhaps and you want to see where it's going. But then ultimately it's so subjective, obviously, and you have to just fall head over heels.
Yes. Yeah. And do you often send feedback for submissions or not really?
Yeah, I try to. Once it starts piling up, I know I missed things.
Right.
But yeah, I really try to kind of make sure everyone knows that I've read something. I have learned over the years that the more detailed I am with feedback, the more likely a writer might quickly kind of almost patchily try to fix what I've said needed fixing. And that might not have been the only issue, or it might have been me trying to help them, but that's not, I still knew it wasn't quite for me if it was just because of that connection. You just really need to something. And so for years I was doing this and just getting a lot more back, and I would feel kind of responsible and want to reread it for them. And I can't maintain that.
Right.
So I've learned
leading them on.
Yeah, exactly. To be pretty clear in my feedback.
Okay. Right,
and succinct.
Right.
But yeah, I try to be honest as well.
Okay. So it's January 2022 and you've opened up submissions again.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything specific in this year that you're looking to add to your list, whether that's genre, age range, style, whatever?
I always have a little wish list. I would love to find, because on the fiction side, although I think the right nonfiction would be interesting, kind of books about protest.
Okay.
I've been really captivated by Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And so I think it'd be interesting to see that treatment in a novel. What's going on. I'm always on the hunt for things kind of set in Eastern Europe. I'm interested in what's happening in Israel and Palestine. And so seeing that, I'd love a fictionalized treatment of that, just because I think I'd love to see that through a character's deeper lens. That would be interesting. I'd love one of the journalists I reached out to is writing a true crime novel. And that's something that I'm really interested in exploring more. And for me, that has to be literary and empathetic and sort of very responsible to the people you're writing about. But I would love to see more of that. I don't know if that gives a flavor.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. Sounds like you want like sort of political, sort of social disruption sort of topics, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and nonfiction wise, I'm always looking for social justice books and books that sort of cast a light too on underrepresented or undercovered communities.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think that's a good broad selection for everyone listening.
Mm-hmm.
And before I ask you which book you'd take to the desert island, what advice would you give writers this year who are looking to get an agent, who are on submission and querying?
I would say to make it a goal to be rejected a certain amount of times and flip that. I saw, it was actually an editor who did this and who also writes, say that was her goal for, I think it was a couple of years back. But I was so impressed by that because it just makes you keep trying. If you want 25 rejections, you make that the goal because it shows that you've been putting your work out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that before. I spoke to someone whose goal was to get 100 rejections in a year, and it's like, pace yourself out.
Yeah,
and it shows that you are making progress. You are putting your work out there. Presumably, they were making updates as they got the rejections.
Yeah. I think there's a way to do that sort of responsibly and productively, for sure. And I want to add one more thing, which I think is really important for writers to do, is just support their literary community, read books and buy short story magazines. And I think that's really important, not only to hone your own craft, not only to support the industry that you want to someday give you money to write, but because it comes back around. I think writers are a community. Yeah.
I've definitely experienced that. And it doesn't take much searching on Twitter to find the sort of the hashtags and things where there's a very supportive and large community of writers, aspiring writers, and also just the kind of extensions around the industry. The publishing industry generally is very friendly, in my experience anyway.
I really agree. I think there's this idea of people being gatekeepers. And I think the chill probably comes from busyness and people just not being able to respond to everything. And but no, I don't really believe anyone wants to ghost writers or turn them down. We're gatekeepers only in the sense that we want to be opening gates. I want every next book I read to be something I can take on. And I really think that's true for my colleagues across the industry.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really nice way of thinking about it. Whenever every query submission that you open, you're hoping that that's going to be something that you want to sign up and you want to get out into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings us to
my desert island book.
Exactly. If you were stranded on a desert island and could have one book with you, which would it be?
So I know you gave me plenty of warning about this book, and I guess I will go with my first instinct, which was, and I'm only hesitant because it feels so boring, but I do think Middlemarch
Okay.
would be the one I would take, because I think it is something that a second read and a third read would, bring nuance to. I've only read it once in my 20s, so I was a late reader to it, and already now I can see from, a decade later, how that would change my reading of hopefulness and career and poor Dorothea. So I think that's the one that would last
Brilliant.
me on
It's
the island.
amazing. It's amazing how I have a young niece, so I've been rewatching a lot of Disney, like the sort of classic animated things recently. And it's amazing how when you're older, you come back to these things and there's just such a whole new light on the story and the way that it kind of pans out and stuff.
That's really cool. I'm looking forward to that with my daughter. Is like, I love the pop-up books, but I cannot wait for her to start reading the stuff that I loved reading and force it upon her, probably until I drain the love of literature out of her.
You will read this and you will enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. You will love this.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for coming on and chatting with me and sharing your experience and your knowledge of the industry and everything entailed within that.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, if you want to keep up with everything that Kate is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at SpinningKates. You can follow the agency at Wolf Literary, and you can go to their website, which is currently in holding, but I'm sure it will be up soon, and that's wolflit.com. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow us on Twitter at Right and Wrong UK and on Instagram at Right and Wrong Podcast. Thanks again, Kate, and thanks to everybody listening. We will catch you on the next episode.
Listen up. I won't sugarcoat it. This is the longest cold, flu, and allergy season we've ever seen, but we're not alone. We've got Instacart. Sure, you may be a coughing snot faucet who just wants mommy, but you're not giving up. Not when cold medicine, fragrant herbal teas, and honey shaped like bears can be delivered through Instacart in as fast as 30 minutes. Now let's go win the sick playoffs.
Daddy, I just want my soup.
Oh, sorry, Sport. App says it'll be here in a few minutes. Instacart for the win.